Very, very honored to be joined here by Carlos Ron, who's the president of the Simon Bolivar Institute and also the vice minister of foreign affairs for North America in Venezuela. Carlos, really appreciate you being on with us here on the Freedom Side.
Oh, it's completely my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Well, the pleasure is absolutely all ours. And maybe for those who haven't heard, just explain, if you could, what is the situation here with Alex Saab, the Venezuelan diplomat who was arrested in Cape Verde and has now been kidnapped and extradited to the United States?
Well, Eugene, I believe you said exactly right. He was a Venezuelan diplomat. He was someone that was assigned as a special envoy who was en route in June of 2020. He was en route to Iran, part of a diplomatic and a mission to actually find a humanitarian mission to find supplies for Venezuela, in preparation or in dealing with the pandemic. And as he arrives in Cape Verde, which is en route, and it's one of the usual stops for airplanes, so they could recharge and refuel and keep going. He was detained. And this is on June 12th, and on June 13th, the day after, there's an order that comes in, an order for his apprehension by the United States government. So in fact, he's actually being detained before. I mean, they found out he was there and basically issued an order there so they could justify his detention, but he was illegally detained. So, and also, if we consider that he's on a diplomatic mission, and people that are on diplomatic missions have diplomatic immunity, diplomatic coverages, according to Article 29 of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. This is an illegal process all throughout. He should not have been detained, as he had covered to be doing what he was doing. At the end of the day, the story is, he's a businessman who became part of our foreign service in a way to help us, find ways to overcome this blockade that we're experiencing under illegal United States coercion measures. And of course, there's an interest on behalf of the U.S. government to attack any solutions that we can find to this blockade. And you would obviously attack somebody who's serving as an envoy, who's trying to get supplies for Venezuela. And also, I believe, even in a more recent context, is a way to carry this out precisely when we are in the framework of a discussion, a political dialogue with the Venezuelan opposition, with the most extreme part of the Venezuelan opposition. So you're doing this in a way to derail this process. So at the end of the day, what we see is that, unfortunately, the U.S. government has not learned from previous mistakes and previous attempts at attacking Venezuela, but rather continues a policy of destabilization and of regime change in one way or another. And this attack, this precise illegal arrest, and kidnapping, because he was taken out of Cape Verde to the United States on October 16th, without informing the defense, without even informing his family members. He was just taken. The day before, there were elections in Cape Verde, and a new government was elected. A new government who, by the way, had given some opinions favorable to the release of Mr. Saab. So you see all this intention of carrying this out, again, to maintain that policy of attacking the Venezuelan government and the Venezuelan people.
I'm curious, Carlos, about first, are there any avenues to even challenge this internationally? Because it really flies in the face of international law on so many levels, from the violation of diplomatic immunity to the fact that Cape Verde did not even have an extradition treaty with the U.S. Right. So what methods are the Venezuelans using, if any, to try to challenge this?
Well, this is the problem that we face when we're confronting an empire with the might and force that the United States has. We have approached the avenues of international law. Even in a regional level, there was a decision issued by ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African Nations, even in March, where they stated that it was illegal to detain. There was an illegal process for the detention of Saab, and that he should be released. Not only should he be released, but they were even asking for reparations for the damage caused on him. For amount of $200,000 and so forth. And this verdict that was issued by the courts of ECOWAS, which Cape Verde belongs to and should be bound by law to comply, this was completely disregarded by both the Cape Verdean government and the United States, and they still proceeded. There was complete disregard also for a statement made by the United Nations Human Rights Council, which we also was also approached and also determined that it was important to release him on grounds that there was no his rights were being violated, no due process and so forth. And this was also disregarded. So the problem we face, the reality we face, is that the pressures and the strength of this aggressions of the United States go against international law. I mean, to begin with, the whole issue of sanctions and implementing U.S. sanctions, as they're wrongly called, because they're not sanctions. The real sanctions are only issued by United Nations Security Council, and whatever measures the United States issues are unilateral. They're coercive measures that are illegal, and they're extraterritorial. I mean, all of a sudden, the United States has room to issue apprehension orders and decide who's good and who's bad and who does a crime or not with beyond its borders. This is outrageous. This is in violation of anything that we can believe is international law. However, they pride on the issue that they have strength and they have the might of their economic power and the might of the military power to carry these things out. And this is something that I think both the international community should protest, and also I believe the people of the United States should question too. Why is their government? I mean, are their tax dollars paying for violations of international law, for illegal procedures of this sort?
One of the things that I was hoping you could talk a little bit about, Carlos, that I think is so important. I mean, Mr. Saab was, at least in the media, closely affiliated with the CLAP program, and I think that to me speaks so heavily to what the U.S. is doing. I mean, it's a large-scale program to feed people. So I was hoping you could just sort of speak to that reality specifically, because I mean, it really does seem that it would be bad anyway, but the true impact of what the U.S. is doing here, it just seems so pernicious when you put it in the context of food and the battle for people to survive.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, and this is the whole point. I mean, the aggression of the United States, they try to justify it, saying that they're going after certain officials in the government, or they're going after specific people, but they're doing this for the well-being of the Venezuelan people. Well, in reality, there's no interest whatsoever in the well-being of the Venezuelan people when you target the food distribution program that is actually in place, in partly because of the measures that the United States has taken that has made it more difficult for Venezuela to import food or to import supplies where we can get our agriculture going and so forth. So you see that there's an intention. I mean, even before this kidnapping of Mr. Saab, there were already sanctions by the U.S. placed on the CLAP program itself. So you were saying, I mean, you're not talking about sanctioning a person or an official. You're talking about a program that distributes food on a subsidized price, and that has been the solution for many Venezuelans. Once they're facing the sanctions. So there's an intention, and this is the key point. There's an intentionality with the use of sanctions to hurt the Venezuelan people and to hurt any people, that's under this regime. Because at the end of the day, what they're trying to provoke is social unrest. They're trying to, separate people from their elected governments, or they're trying to do whatever it takes so that the regime change they hope for takes place. So this is the real intention. It's to coerce. It's to force a government to change its policies, to change its views, to change, or to change the government itself. That's a real deal. There's no interest in the Venezuelan people. if there was any interest in the Venezuelan people, they would have unblocked, the accounts of Venezuelan money that's in different banks around the world. We could have already paid for all the vaccines that we need for the whole Venezuelan population. That's not their concern. Their concern is to hurt President Maduro, to hurt his government, any decisions that are made here in order to favor the promotion of socialism or the construction of a new society. That's a real aim.
Carlos, this targeting of Alex Saab, as you know, was initiated by the Trump administration, whose Treasury Department had added him to the U.S. Sanctions list just months after Juan Guaido appointed himself president. Yet, of course, this prosecution of Alex Saab is continuing under the Biden administration. So my question for you is, has there been any change whatsoever between the previous administration and this one, or are they continuing the same policy as Trump, like with zero relief?
See, the thing that is a big question mark for everyone is that we believed, or we saw that there was a real move on behalf of the people of the United States to change the policies of President Trump by electing a new government. We saw that on the streets. We saw that on we have a perception that what the people of the United States wanted was real change, a government that would be that would be more respectful of international law, that would come back to the international community, would defend human rights in the United States. Unfortunately, we don't see in the case of Venezuela that there has been any substantial change. There's some change in form, we, of course, it's a welcome thing not to have Pompeo or Bolton speaking every so often. That's nice. But the fact that at the end of the day you still have pressure by the United States for the same things. I mean, there has been no removal of any of the illegal sanctions of the United States on Venezuela. So despite the fact that there's a new government, we're still under the same situation that we were in January of this year. So right before the Trump administration left, we still have the same sanctions, and we still see that these actions are these aggressions of these actions are taken with the purpose of removing President Maduro from office and disrespecting the will of the Venezuelan people. So I would hope that I think there's still time, and hopefully something would enlighten some leaders in the United States. But I would hope that they would see that what this election was about was completely separating the United States from this authoritarian supremacist type of government, and to respect international law. I believe that is what the real people of the United States want, not aggression against Venezuela, or not to interfere into the business of the Venezuelan internal affairs of the Venezuelan people. I think there has to be a respect for international law and for self-determination.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, Carlos, that I think is important just about the timing of how this played out is, of course, the negotiations that are going on in Mexico between the government and some elements of the opposition. But also to add on to that, I mean, the context of what is a very vibrant electoral campaign going on right now in Venezuela for the November 21st elections, where there's many forces participating. And I think, in many ways, it feels that a lot of the, well, maybe this is not the right way to say it, that maybe the polarization isn't fully moving apart, but that there's the national unity of the country is growing, that many more people who even had been tied to some of these U.S. policies are moving away from that and looking for reconciliation and all these other pieces. And it just seems for this to come in the context of all that there's also a little fear from the United States that really they can't destroy Venezuela, and they're sort of desperately trying to find whatever they can to throw a monkey wrench into all these processes, which I think are bringing a lot of hope to people there on the ground.
You see what I think is key, what has happened in the last couple months, is that the group of extremist opposition leaders that were closer to the Trump policy and to the United States policy in general, who in 2014, 2017 promoted violence and promoted unconstitutional means to get into power, these people realized that their project failed, because even within the Venezuelan opposition, there's no real support to them. There's actually a whole bunch of huge accusations on corruption on behalf of these people as well. People that have misplaced the money, not only the money that they have illegally taken from Venezuelan accounts, or from the taking over of Citgo, which was also another sanction that the United States issued and allowed these people to rob the country of its oil company in the United States. But also, there's a complete failure in confidence. I mean, they have not achieved the confidence of the Venezuelan opposition. So now they realize that the only way to keep having a political presence in Venezuela was to return to the negotiating table, was to return to elections, to return to politics. This is a huge success for Venezuela. This is a huge success also, I believe, for President Maduro as a leader, that he managed to hold out these attacks, all this violence, and reconduct these actors to the negotiating table and to politics. Now, the problem with that is that these are the people that are mostly tied with the regime change policy of the United States, and now they see that they really don't have they don't even have the support to win elections. I mean, some of them were still thinking whether they would run or not, and so forth. They question, because they know that because of all the damage they've done. I mean, seriously, a lot of people here in Venezuela, even within the opposition, they know that these people went up to Washington, went up to the United States and said, sanction our country, use these tools so that you could pressure the government of Nicolas Maduro, and then we could, come into power. So there's a resentment. There's obviously a resentment on the people of Venezuela, even in the opposition, because they know that they're responsible for this. Now, when you see that things are moving forward, like you said, towards reconciliation, towards democratic participation, well, that means that regime change formula, where it was an all-out takeover of the government that they were planning, I mean, come on, they made up a fake presidency.
Right.
They wanted to really take over the country,
So
and well,
crazy.
that fell apart. That fell apart. Nobody is really taking them seriously in Europe. Nobody's even taking them seriously here in Latin America. So they see themselves lost, and I believe that has to have weight into these decisions, or decisions like the one with Saab, where you do these things so that you can kind of derail the process, so where you can create another tension that's not existent. Because what was really going to happen had this not taken place was that we were going to continue negotiations, we're going to continue conversations, we're going to have and we're still going to have a very good election where a lot of the opposition is going to participate, and maybe, yes, of course, maybe they win or not, that doesn't matter. Democracy is what matters. The democracy, the process that is carried out. Well, they want to derail that. They want to create new tensions. They want, once again, to bring their people back into the forefront. But they're lost. I mean, there's no backing by the Venezuelan people, and that's what really hurts for them. That they have no way of making these people their real representatives or the real Venezuelan government.
No, I think that's such an important point. Go ahead, Rania.
No, I was just gonna say, it really does seem like this is an act of desperation, in the sense that despite all the strangulation and suffocation of Venezuela through these unilateral coercive measures, the country is still standing, the government is still standing, the opposition that the U.S. backed completely failed, and amazingly enough, Venezuela has found trading partners like Iran, which I think is so incredible that Venezuela and Iran have been able to, send ships back and forth to trade oil with one another, and the U.S. can't do anything to stop it. So it does seem like a huge act of desperation. I'm just curious, as we come to the end here, we are still in a pandemic. So despite the fact that Venezuela is still standing, what is the situation in Venezuela in relation to COVID, and how are the U.S. sanctions impacting the country's ability to deal with it? Though I should add, Venezuela does seem to be dealing with COVID far better than America, than the U.S. is.
Well, Rania, like you said, I think this is a part of one of the difficulties that we've had to face, but that we couldn't have faced alone. If it wasn't for the solidarity of countries like Cuba, like Iran, Russia, China, Turkey, that have come out and helped us, get those supplies that we needed to fight the pandemic. We wouldn't have been able to face it because of the blockade. I mean, when you go try to find medical supplies in the market, any country that's not on the sanctions can easily just go and buy it from whoever they want. When we try to do it, there's a lot of providers that they won't sell because they're afraid of what the U.S. sanctions might do to them, or if they're sanctioned for doing, even for selling medicine, which is one thing that the U.S. government usually says, oh no, but medicine and food are not in the sanctions. That's not true. There are companies that have gone into bankruptcy because they have made deals with Venezuela. There's always ways of pressuring these companies. So it's been a difficulty for us to overcome this. When we tried to pay for the COVAX vaccines, we were about 90% fully paid of the contract, and then there was an order issued by one of the banks to stop the payment. This is Venezuelan money, and it's going for vaccines. There's there's nothing here that you could say could be used for corruption or all these things that they usually try to claim. This is really an attack on the Venezuelan people. Fortunately, Venezuela is a complicated case for them because the one thing that they don't realize is because they don't understand what community organizing is, what popular resistance is. They don't understand that even when a people are subjected to these measures, they have the consciousness of sticking together, of weighing this out. It was so wonderful to see how Venezuelan communities have organized with the communal councils, with the communes, and with the brigades of the Cuban doctors that came over, and how they would help and provide food for for those families that had elderly people at most risk, so they wouldn't have to go out on the streets and put themselves in risk. The whole network that came into play with the popular organizations, together with government policies, together with having a healthcare system that is public and free and accessible, where you can have places where you could have people tested, or you could take people to get treatment. When they do get COVID. They don't understand that this actually works. And fortunately, in comparison to our neighbors, we've seen a terrible situation, for example, in Brazil, with the huge number of people dying. But we still have done a lot of control. We have issued a method where there's 7 days of exposure, and then there's 7 days where you kind of businesses close down, or you kind of lessen your activities so that you don't get as exposed. And we're trying to find a balance. It's difficult because, of course, we know COVID has had a hard impact on all economies, but we're trying to find ways to help that out. But it's very important that the network that people have, the solidarity, those values that the United States believes don't exist because they don't they don't have in their government mindset. Well, they do exist, and they do provide things that are achievable. And one of the things that are achievable is that the solidarity amongst the Venezuelan people has allowed us to survive this pandemic.
No, I think that's such an important point. And I think, another point, just the leadership from the top and the grassroots from the bottom, the interaction between the two. I mean, the daily press conferences, President Maduro, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, this is what's happening with the pandemic. This is what we're doing. This is what to expect. I mean, I think it really is very unique all around the world. And I would just leave and encourage people, go to that New York Times thing where you can compare different countries and what's going on with COVID, compare Venezuela to every country in Latin America. And I think you might be a little surprised based on what you hear. But Carlos Roan, super honored to have you here on the show. Thanks for joining us and giving us some of your time
my pleasure.
here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.